So, we can kind of just hop into it, and I want to talk about, I want to talk about the new album, all of that. But, talking about sort of staying close to home and being, I think it's rare for somebody who does what you do to not be in LA or to not be in New York. And it's just interesting. Do you find, working on music, does the place you are, does that affect your thought process, your writing process? Does it affect your output?
It's such a terrific question. So I think that where you live, it's one of those funny things. Full disclosure, I was raised by a psychiatrist. So my mom is a brilliant doctor. And so I use a lot of what's called, I think in the psychiatric vernacular, psychobabble would be the official term of it when I talk.
So just kind of
fair warning. But I do think, there's an interesting thought thread insofar as, it's one of those things that people say, oh, it's not where you are, it's what kind of your internal locus, what's going on inside you. And of course there's truth in that, but it's sort of a both and, I think, in that it really does affect, especially for people that are artists, and our job is to kind of absorb our environment and sort of purge that through whatever our medium, our artistic medium is. And so I think it does have a pretty profound impact on you where you live if you're artistically inclined. And so interestingly, we sort of split our time up between the East and the West Coast. We have a place in LA, and then we have a place here on the East Coast as well too. And so because I do a lot of film stuff, I'm probably there about a week, a month. And so we've got a lot of close friends, and I have family there actually in Los Angeles as well too. And so I miss it when we're not there. And I lived full time in Los Angeles for 10, 12 years. And it started to get, I didn't like living there full time, if I'm being totally honest about it. It's a really, really difficult place to live.
I feel like a lot of people, you put in your time, you're there for, a sort of crucial number of years. And then a lot of people end up getting out again, man.
You're absolutely right about that. I mean, I can't even tell you how right you are about that. I have so many friends that have done their time there. They kind of establish their career in a way that they're happy and proud of and is sustainable. And then they're like, thanks, but no thanks, with all the, home robberies and traffic, and no thank you, So it's a tough place to live in, especially with what's going on now. There's like a safety issue in Los Angeles, and it's something that people don't like talking about, but everywhere in Los Angeles, there's safety issues, honestly.
I mean, most major cities, man. Yeah, it's a little hairy. I mean, even for me living in the heart of DC, and DC by the numbers is not as bad as a lot of places, but it feels a bit weird to be so close to so many people right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally hear you. I really do. So, and I love California. I love being there, but I did my full-time time there. And so, it's really nice. And we live in a place that is just very peaceful. And we're so thankful during this time in particular that, our family were able to just walk outside, and our neighbors have cows and horses and stuff. And so,
that's great.
We get our eggs from an Amish farm, a couple miles from here, and our vegetables and fruits from local co-ops and stuff.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah. Food's great.
Did you grow up in an environment like that? A bit more rural?
I didn't. It's a great question. I grew up actually in Rockville, Maryland, and I was born and raised. Well, I was born in Columbia, Maryland, and raised in Rockville. And I went to, the area, so you'll know some of these things.
Sure.
Anybody that knows the sort of Maryland, DC, Virginia area will know of some of the things that we're going to talk about now. So I grew up, in the sort of lower middle class suburbs in the 80s and rode my bike to what at the time was called Montgomery Mall. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Landon, and I went to a private boys' school. I studied at the Washington Conservatory of Music in DC. And
sure. At a young age, right?
Yeah, I started there when I was 7, turning 8, and I started piano before that. I studied with a handful of local teachers, a woman named Faye Bonner, who was just amazing. And crazily, too, Faye Bonner also taught, you want to hear a small world thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Faye Bonner also taught my friend that scored Breaking Bad.
Oh, wow.
How crazy is that? And we didn't know one another here. But we grew up in the same area with the same piano teacher. So that tells you something about how lucky we were as students to have some of these teachers. So anyway, I grew up in suburban Maryland, and so here's the story, is when I signed my first record deal, which is a long sort of circuitous route to that place. But when that happened in England in the early 90s, I signed my record deal, and, a lot of my friends that had signed record deals, they took their album in advance, and I don't know what they did. They went on vacation or spent money on sneakers or something. And I said, okay, I was raised by 2 academics, and I said, okay, I barely, but I do have enough money for the down payment on a house. And by that time, Rockville had really built up. I couldn't buy a house in that area. They had gotten to be too expensive. So I looked out in the country in an area that I knew well and was familiar with. And so I settled on a place in the country here. And the crazy thing is, too, I bought it. This is early 90s. I bought an old farmhouse, but it had a lot of land. And it was all I could afford. Right. It's like maxed out, all I could afford. But now it's crazy because civilization has come. We're on an agricultural preserve, so civilization has come up to 15 miles of us, and this is like this coveted place, and you would have never thought it. It was like a dirt road when I got this out here. But I was lucky enough to hang on to it while I was living in Los Angeles full time, and I had to rent it out and stuff. And then when I moved back here, for most of the time, I spent a lot of time gutting it and making, the studio I'm sitting in now, and
yeah, beautiful studio.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It's my dream room. It really is. It's like, I've never even had a sound treated room before. So
really
Never in my life. I've always worked in basements or attics or, guest bedrooms or closets, never with sound treatment. I've never had soffit mounted speakers.
That's really interesting.
I've always worked in rooms with parallel walls. So the music that I've made in this room is unforgiving in the best possible way. So it's funny, the speakers, you can't see them from this angle. If you're interested, I can turn them around and show you them. But I have ATC soffit mounted speakers in this room with 2 quad 15 subs, and they're in this crazy wall that leans on a 14 and a 27 degree angle with this trapezoid, and it's built out of barn. It's like these guys are artists that built this room. And anyway, these speakers are so unbelievably unforgiving that I can't listen to old music of mine in this room.
Right.
All I hear is mistakes. And they're like mastered records that have been released, fans love. And I'm like, God, there's like this horrible note at 170 on this record. Like, they're totally unforgiving.
Well, and it's funny to think about you as somebody who I think of as, such a techie person, so interested invested in hardware and getting in the guts of something. It's funny to think about you for so long working in untreated rooms and rooms where, you know, a lot of the tech stuff was sort of out of your control.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a great point, you know, and it's funny too, because I focused so much more on learning harmony and theory and, you know, counterpoint and songwriting and production and engineering and recording techniques and all these kind of things that I never, in synthesis and sound design and all these different disciplines. And I never thought my work would be so much easier if I didn't have to print a mix and then go listen to it in the car and listen on headphones or listen on AirPods and then listen in all these environments. If you just have something where you can really hear what's actually happening, you immediately make the right decisions, you know? Yeah. You're just like, oh, okay, that's wrong. Let's fix that. That needs a little compression. That's why there's some 40 hertz in that thing. Too much 10K in this, whatever, blah, blah. And it just makes things so much more immediate. So between having this incredible, my dream room, and things like over the last 5 years or so, having basically what's for my intents and purposes is like my version, modern version of a synclavier, which is my PC Audio Labs PC with, you know, a 3,000 track contact auto load with audio over IP to my main Mac. Is these things like this have been life-changing. Like, you know, I can do a mix in this room in a half an hour that I'm confident about. And like, somebody might not like the piece of music, but, you know, obviously if I'm mixing it, it's something I like and I'm proud of. But I can tell you I'm confident about the mix because I know what's happening in the room, you know, so it just makes making decisions so much easier. And then something like that makes writing so much easier. So it's pretty remarkable. Some of the advancements that have happened, even over the last 5 to 7 years, are just, you know, extraordinary.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that because I think, you know, there's always that false idea that sort of you can fix your issues with a piece of gear, or that, you know, if you just had X piece of software, your music would be better. But I think that misconception comes from the fact that there are things out there that can help make you make better decisions, right? Or be more efficient.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. I love how you characterize that too, because it is a real, going back to some kind of shrink talk here, it really is a carrot that we dangle for ourselves. This idea that there is a thing outside of ourselves that is going to make us better at what we do. And not to say that there aren't things that add refinement to what we do, right? But that you know, as being said, really the things that matter are focusing on single instruments, on single techniques, on single ideas, and really drilling down and learning things deeply. You know, we live in such a high turnover rate sort of culture, whether it's, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. It's news, it's social media, it's music, it's everything. You know, I read this study, and it was a remarkable study talking about the inverse scalar of things like social media to our attention span. So as these things expand, our attention span goes down. I believe it was in the mid-2000s, our attention span was on average for an American was roughly 12 seconds.
Okay.
Now, in 2020, our attention span on average is 1 second.
Ooh.
And so, but check it out. What was crazy about this study was the punchline to it was they addressed the elephant in the room, which is what happens when our attention span goes to zero. And they said we're already close to that. Obviously, we're like at a second. And what happens is it means you're instantly dissatisfied with something without even experiencing it.
Huh. Interesting.
And so you go into something disappointed.
Right. because mentally you've already kind of moved on.
You're ready for the next thing before you've even ingested the thing that you're on. So, and it's an interesting segue because it's exactly what the title of my album is about. Because
you're doing my work for me, man. This is great.
It's just we kind of came to it organically.
I love it. Yeah.
It's the album is called The Lost Art of Longing, and the idea behind it, often titles will come to me and I won't really know what they mean, and but I'll know if it's good or not. And I have a list of titles and I will jot things down, and then I'll understand them kind of in retrospect. And that really is what that's about. It's it's an emergent theme on so many of the lyrics of the songs on this record. This idea that we've lost the ability to sit in hopeful silence.
Hopeful silence is that's a very evocative phrase. I like that.
But you understand what I mean by that, right? Like we've lost. Not completely. It's there. The ghost of it is still present, right? And the echoes of it are still here. But this idea to sit and wait and know that 3 days from now, somebody that we love is going to write us a letter and it's going to be in the mailbox and we're going to go get it. And it's written by their own hand and we're going to sit and read it and it's intended just for us, right?
Yeah.
Or that somebody's going to call us on a rotary payphone, right? And as it started to unfold to me, this idea, I realized that there's all of these objects and things and methodologies, ways of communicating that have become obsolete, that, stories of incredible love, loss, hope, like the whole human condition were experienced in some of these different things. And whether it's by the telephone or a telegraph or, in vinyl albums or there are these devices, right, that had such a more human way of us communicating. And, we live in an instant gratification culture. And one thing I can say I feel super duper blessed about is I've got fans that want to go on a journey and actually do have an attention span. It's funny when we put out, what's called 7 inches of songs, and now because of Spotify algorithms, all this kind of stuff, it's it's important. You have to put out these shorter mixes of things because the algorithmic sort of the way that it ingests the songs into the system, it won't make the certain reach that it needs to playlist and all this kind of stuff. My fans all freak out and they're like, yo, BT, where's the 10-minute version? I know you have it. I want that one, So, it's really kind of an ode to that thought of how important it is that we still allow ourselves moments of quiet and hope and longing and appreciating things that as they unfold, even when they're hard, right? Yeah. What we find ourselves in, I don't know who said it, but it's something that I heard someone say years and years ago that always has stuck with me. And I've heard Ed Milet, who does a wonderful podcast, say it too. This idea that things don't happen to you, they happen for you. And I love that idea.
Yeah.
I think, there's obvious terrible things about what we're experiencing collectively in our country and the world right now. People have lost loved ones. People have lost their lives. People have lost their jobs. There's a lot of loss going on right now. And there's a both and. I can hold these two ideas in one thought. And the and is that there's some really beautiful things that are going to come out of this in the ways that we treat other people. I strongly believe this in understanding other people's predicament and their life in ways that we wouldn't have stopped to take and pay attention to prior to it. So anyway, kind of going off the deep end here, but that's a little great. In a nutshell, the idea of what the title of the album is. So we just kind of got there.
Yeah, I love that, man. Yeah, and we haven't even we all of that is for the title, and we haven't even touched the music yet, which I heard, and I like the album a lot. And for me, I wonder. Like I look at the titles of some of your other records, right? Like this one is the Lost Art of Longing. You have records with titles like Emotional Technology, These Hopeful Machines, Song Across Wires. And so I tend to think, you bring these sort of high concepts to your work. And I wonder, I don't know if you're able to sort of break this down, but I always wonder, if you approach it with a high concept in mind, how does that translate into the mechanical business of writing a song?
That's such a great question. I mean, that's a phenomenal question. And I want to answer this in a way that I hope provides a lot of that helps people that have a pain point in tackling a big project.
Yeah.
I'm kind of framing it in that way. I want to shed some light on that because it's a question I get asked a lot. I have this amazing group of people that are interested in my music. 70% of which is a real number are content creators themselves.
Sure.
And a lot of them professionals. We're talking about artists, animators, directors, editors, Foley, designers, just incredible bunch of people. So this is what you're talking about is a common pain point in creating a large body of work. So let's just kind of drill down on those three words, large body of work. Okay. If you're focused on that, you can be kind of have a sort of macro marching orders. But if you're focused on the big thing, you can't get there. And that's usually how a lot of people pull their own power cord out, I think. I've done it to myself before, so speak with authority on this. So I'm always thinking about things insofar as micro goals, always. So what's helpful for me when I set out to do a project is I write, and it sounds crazy. I have them. People have asked to see them. I think I've shown one or two of them. I write a small thesis. So for this record, this turned out being close to 40 pages, what I wrote down I wanted to accomplish on this record. I knew how many songs I wanted to make. I knew what I wanted them to feel like. I knew what I wanted the lyrical content to be like. I knew how many songs of certain styles I wanted to tackle.
Wow.
I broke it down into very manageable micro goals. I also knew that I would be working on, I've completed multiple film scores and 2 ambient albums and all kinds of software projects and all sorts of stuff in the same time period. So time blocking, time management, and having sort of macro picture with these micro goals is the only way I can get these big projects done. So I hope that offers some insight into that.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah. Does the concept come to you first? Is that if you come up with this concept, is that sort of what alerts you to the fact that there might be a cool body of work that could go with it? Or is it as you're writing songs, you sort of come across a thread that connects them?
That's such a great question too. So it's the concept comes first, I would say always. And when I say concept, I don't necessarily mean the name.
Right.
So, but the sort of idea for what the body of work is comes first. And I've got right now, let's count 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 right now because I treat it like agile development and software. They all sort of overlap. All these things are overlapping. I know insofar as kind of percentage where I am in the process of each one of them. So, I have 4 things at least in process right now, independent of software development. So that I have 11 applications across 7 companies I'm working on right now, and have been some of them one of them, we're 3 years into it, and that will come early first quarter 2021. Anyway, just creative projects, so not the software development stuff. I've got 4 projects that'll come out over the next probably 4 years in various stages of development. So it really, just to go back to it, like the time blocking and time management piece of it is just tantamount in what I do. And often the titles will come at just totally random times, maybe even at the last minute. But the concept is what is the spark that lights the fire always. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, it makes me think about, you were talking about your childhood earlier, and that you started studying music very seriously at a very young age. And I wonder, I feel like maybe some of those habits were instilled in you early in terms of being meticulous about what you're doing, having a lot to cover, wanting to delve in deeply, and needing to divide up that time. And I'm always curious, where these kind of tendencies come from in people. Do you think, if you look back, the music thing in general and going into music seriously at a young age, was that your impulse? Was it something your parents were into? Like, where does that come from?
So again, these are just, you're asking me great questions.
Oh, hey man, I'm trying.
You really are, because you're onto something interesting here. So my answer to that is going to be different than you may think. So again, just sort of looping back to my folks, I was raised by 2 brilliant academics. My dad worked for the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration as a field agent, and went on in his retirement to work for the Department of the Interior, the highest level, unelected level of government, and cut over $1 billion, got this big award for cutting $1.5 billion of waste out of the federal government. Just brilliant people. My dad has a PhD, my mom is a doctor. And so my parents were absolutely mortified, horrified, even terrified that their son's expression was in the arts. So, I have amazing parents, and they introduced me to a lot of different things, and sports, and more than anything, academia was strongly pushed on me. Also, too, because I got good grades. And so my parents were terrified when I was, literally taking apart things, shortwave radios in my room, and building oscillators out of Radio Shack project kits, and practicing the piano for 7 hours instead of doing my math homework. They're terrified. Like, they did not know what was going to happen to me. They thought I was going to be in the gutter on heroin someday. Sure. And you know what I mean? Because their parents weren't educated, and they were fascinating people too. And not like they were uneducated, but they weren't my parents, who had to buy their bootstraps, put themselves through school. And so they wanted that for their kids. And I clearly was not going in that direction. Now, interestingly about me, as an adult, I've come to learn that I am as far ADHD as you can get without being sort of on spectrum. So if I was a kid now, I would be so incredibly medicated as to probably be non-functional. But I had the good fortune of growing up in the 80s when that was not as accepted of a practice. And not saying that that's not good and necessary for kids, but what happened because of that was, and those of you listening to this, watching this, that have ADHD and ADD will know that there is this almost like quantum superpower that comes from ADD and ADHD of an ability to hyper focus. So it's funny because, attention deficit disorder or attention hyperactive deficit, whatever, right? What's funny is the way that I always think of it is it's a a failure, if you will, to pay attention what everybody else wants you to pay attention to. But if you're given something you want to pay attention to, you can do it until you drop, literally, until you wet yourself or are dying of starvation, right? It's a superpower of sorts. So I've had this ability to hyper-focus my entire life on music and computers and coding and technology and electronics and composition, and it's served me remarkably well. So to those people watching this or listening to this that have been given this seal that feels like some kind of stigmata that you have ADHD, I say to you that this is a remarkable gift of sorts when you find the thing that you're most passionate about. So there's that piece. And then the other weird little piece is that on the Myers-Briggs personality test, I am this strange unicorn personality called an INTJ. And 3 people just threw something at their screen that are also INTJs. We apparently make up less than 1% of the population. And once you know one, you can never kind of unknow one. It's such a specific sort of personality. It has a lot to do with, I mean, it's kind of like that dovetail crossing with the ADHD is me in a nutshell. So you can read about that I guarantee you some people listening to and watching this, there will be some on here. And the wildest thing about this last little kind of bow on this conversation is the wildest thing about this is at one point we did a thing and we were talking about, Myers-Briggs, love languages, all these interesting kind of personality tests, Enneagram. And I posted that I'm an INTJ. And again, mind you, this is the rarest, weirdest person. And not like this is great either. It has great things. There's a dark side to it too. So it's like we have to keep ourselves in a very congruent place to be high functioning INTJs, but we're a very interesting bunch and we can be incredibly creative and do some remarkable things if we're self-regulated and focused. So all that being said, we posted about it and there were literally hundreds of people that said, I've never met another INTJ of fans. Oh, wow. And it was like weird, like almost like, people are drawn to something in what they have this sort of sense memory almost of this thing that they are just by listening to it was a wild thing.
So, by listening to something made by a similar person. That's interesting.
Yeah. And there's something too about both of these things we just talked about that I think that people that have ADHD it's remarkable how much negative stigma there is around ADD and ADHD insofar as, this kid is, hyper, we can't get him to pay attention and he's freaking out. And he's like, the problem is you've not exposed that child yet to something they want to pay attention to, right? When they find that, you're not going to be able to get them away from it. I'm telling you, it's literally a superpower, but there's something about that piece, that specifically ADHD piece that is, I think that people that have ADHD really, really appreciate complexity, like intricacy in work, whether it's carpentry or painting or music, that they really enjoy. If they're music fans, they really enjoy nuanced complexity in work. And I think that out of that is something that draws a lot of people to, the stuff that I do, because it's very methodical and there's so much detail in it that it's preposterous at times. So
right. Yeah. And I mean, if that was you from an early age, I think that makes a lot of sense because you went on to go to Berklee College of Music when you were also pretty young, right? Like 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Something like that. And even going on from that, I think the fact that not only that you were able to sort of find that secret thing, whatever it was that unlocked the key that you could sort of hyper focus, but that your parents eventually must have sort of come around to support you and get that early start. I feel like that probably made a big difference in your overall career, you know?
Yeah, there's absolutely no question that it did. There's no question. And it's a nice memory for me to remember, because there were actual moments where I saw my parents, and I can vividly remember it with my mom. I brought my mom and my aunt to Australia on a tour of Australia in the 90s, and they were with me, and I was playing I think in Sydney, and we oversold the show. It was crazy. You know, there's 25,000 people there, and it's supposed to be like the max capacity was 21,000. It was the Docklands.
Nice.
The crowd spilled out. They had to open the doors, and thousands of people were like outside the hangar and stuff. And I remember performing and looking over at my mom and seeing the smile on my mom's face and how proud she was, and thinking what a personal victory that, my whole experience in that show wasn't about the audience at all. It was about watching my mom, who for I think probably, and not like my parents haven't believed in me. My parents have been so incredibly supportive, but they've also been terrified. And they've, I think, many times not wanted to encourage it, because they've been worried what will happen to, our smart kid that could go be a doctor, right? And so seeing my mom's face in that show, and like the smile on her face, and I just watched her watching the show, and I realized sort of in that moment that my mom understood what I do and got it and was on board. And, that was a ways into my career at that point, but it was a pretty special moment. I still remember it like it was happening, 5 minutes ago.
That's a beautiful, beautiful moment, man. And it's funny from an artist perspective too, because I relate to that strongly, where you can be in front of 10,000 people, but it really, not that isn't great and you don't appreciate it, but sometimes there's just one specific person that you can focus on, whether it's a parent or whether it's, a peer or anyone. Yeah. And the standards we hold ourselves to are different than the standards people who listen to what we do are. You know what I mean?
Unquestionably. I know what you mean. Most definitely. It's funny because people will say, I'll be at a show after signing stuff, hanging out and whatever. And, people say, my God, that's the greatest show I've ever seen you do. I've gone to 17 of your shows on 3 continents and blah, blah. And you're like, and of course you don't say it to them, but all the mistakes that you made, right? Yeah. Like, everything that you did wrong. The inverse can be true too. Like, I can have a show. I've had shows where I'm like, I just killed it. Like, I played all my parts right if I'm playing live, or the mixes were spot on, and the reaction could be kind of like lackluster, and you're like, this was the one. You know what I mean? So It's so funny. It is so different, kind of from the perspective of being on the stage. Also, too, just the interesting thing about that is part of what I love about electronic music is that there's less separation between the performer and the audience.
Yeah.
When you're playing in like a DJ type context, there's a lot more kind of connection, I feel like, with the experience the audience is having and that you're having, and this kind of symbiotic interrelationship than there is necessarily like, there's a band, here's an audience, and then there's this space in between them, and they're there, right. And they're doing their thing and talking and playing, and they're there and they're receiving and enjoying. But like, there's this thing where it kind of like comes together with an electronic music culture that's very unique and special about it.
And I think part of it is the dance culture as well, right? Because dance is another form of expression that's sort of, it's in the name, it's dance music. And it actually makes me think about the new album, Lost Art of Longing, again, because this seems like you're returning to dance music in a way that, not that you ever really left it, but it's sort of firmly sort of planting your foot back in that world. And I wondered, is that something you had been missing? Like, why this sound for this time?
That's a great question. So these things are sort of cyclical for me, So one of the things that is it's a both and is both challenging and rewarding in equal measure, actually, about doing a lot of different types of music is that you find yourself I get bored easily, if I'm being really honest. So I'll do something, I'll score a film, and my agents and everybody are freaking out, and it just did great and blah, blah. And we've got these 7 other offers, and I'm like, I don't want to do that right now. Like, I really need to go do this. And then I spend 18 months making a piece of software and working on some experimental IDM record with no vocals and live orchestra. And then, like, at the end of that, then it's funny because you can split my fans into 2 groups of people that it's hysterical, actually. So people that like the dance music that I do, they don't even count the records in between the dance music records that are experimental or classical or what have you. And the people that like the This Binary Universe type sound, they don't count the dance records at all. So both of them are just sitting there like, when's my next one coming? I'm waiting, right? Like this.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure people who know you from the film world have even a third perspective, right?
It's totally true. I mean, it's so funny, like when some of my film composer friends, like somebody like, it's so weird I get to call him a friend because he's a hero of mine, studied him in school, like somebody like Mark Isham, and we scored a Philip K. Dick story together, who's, like probably my biggest sci-fi hero.
One of my favorite authors,
Yeah, I mean, like, when androids dream of electric sheep to, virtual light. I mean, I've read just about every Philip K. Dick book there is. So anyway, so thrilling to get to work on something with both with Mark and that was written by Philip K. Dick. So Mark, is this Isham, is this incredible, Emmy, Grammy-winning trumpet genius, wizard, right? And so he's come out of sort of I don't even really know what to call it, jazz and classical kind of world, and then, into film scoring, and it literally has scored hundreds of films and TV shows. He's like as successful as you can get in that world. So he and I have had these conversations, we had these moments where he's like, that's really weird that you and I do this, and then you like get on a plane and go to Hong Kong and play for 30,000 people, like pounding dance music. It breaks people's brains,
Sure.
But anyway, I mean, really, the punchline to all of that is I just get bored doing one thing sort of over and over again. So with The Lost Art of Longing, the last what would be considered a dance music record would be A Song Across Wires. That's 2013. So that's 7 years ago. I've done 4 albums in between then and now,
right?
2 of which have gone to #1 on iTunes, that are these wild experimental, part classical, part glitchy electronic records. And that fans of that sound, right? The kind of This Binary Universe thing. It's their favorite thing in the world. They love coding to it and studying to it and all these kind of things. I have over the last year gotten letters from 2 different brain surgeons that like listening to those records to do in surgery.
Wow.
How cool is that?
That's so crazy.
And crazy 2 in 1 year we heard from 2 remarkable stories around that style of music. We have a lot of, combat veterans that gravitate towards, that are totally in that camp.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stories are unbelievable. We had a couple years ago, I got a box and I sat down at the kitchen table with my daughter and my wife, and my mom was visiting us. And my wife picked it up from the post office box, and she said, "No, this is for you." And so I sat down. We're just all talking, and I opened it, and there's a letter. And so I started reading the letter, and like a paragraph in, I just stopped, and I said, "You guys have to hear this. I have to read it out loud." And so it's a couple page long letter, and I read the letter, all 4 or 5 pages of it, and by the end of it, all of us at the table had tears streaming down our face, and it was this. Truly, like this, no hyperbole, like all of us were crying by the end of this letter. And it was someone that had, and I don't want to say his name, we've subsequently come to know him, he's done multiple tours, but he fought in Iraq, and he was seriously injured. He had a traumatic brain injury and some very serious injuries. And he came back and was rehabbed at Walter Reed. And during the time period of his rehabilitation, all he listened to was This Binary Universe. And he said, this record gave me the courage to go on. I feel like this record helped me to heal. I listened to it when I was sleeping. I listened to it when I was working. I listened to all, and it was so powerful, this letter. And then in the box was this man's Purple Heart. He sent me his Purple Heart.
Oh, man.
It was like one of the heaviest, most amazing things that has ever happened to me. But so it's a strange thing. I've heard from so many special operators when I've played in San Diego all time, because there's where the SEALs train there. Yep. There would be guys that would come out every single show with, they'd grown out their huge beards. They're getting deployed the next week or whatever. And they'd come out for like kind of their last night out. And these are people that I'd hear from on Facebook and some of whom, didn't come back, but just remarkable that it was just a wild thing that group of people in my fans, they love that sound of music, and they always talk about how it like calms, it's soothing and calms them down, and like how complex some of the percussion stuff is. It's funny, a friend of mine who's a scientist, he's been on me now for years. A good friend of mine I grew up with named Hamid Ganadin. It's like my brother, actually. He said to me for years, he said, there's a white paper in there. He's like, we actually need to study this because you've heard the same story so many times over and over again about people convalescing, listening to this music. He's like, there's some neurological thing that's happening with the complexity, the refresh rate of all these crazy microrhythmic things. He's like, there's something going on there that like is actually quantifiable. And so he's been on me for years about us doing some kind of double-blind study or a white paper around that style of music and the people that gravitate towards it. So at any rate, long story short,
fascinating, man.
Yeah. There's these two dominant things in the records that I do, the sounds. And so, yeah, it has been a minute since a dance record. And it's been a minute since I've wanted to do that too. I started this probably, it's not that long to me either, right? So 2013, like I started this record it's 2020 now. So I started this record in late 2016. So it's not, it always takes me 3 to 4 years to make a record. One of the co-writers on this, Paul Harris, he's an absolute genius. And him and his partner, Cy, these two guys, we wrote a song on the album called The War that Irana Mancini sings on. He's an amazing singer. And we started talking about it in 2017. I was just looking at some of the emails and I said, hey guys, okay, so here's the deal. First, would love to write a song with you. I love the songs that you guys write. Okay. I want to calibrate everybody's expectations from the jump properly. This won't come out for 3 to 4 years. And the joking back and forth is, yeah, sure, whatever, BT. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. So you can't share snippets of this on social media. Right. Like this is going to be 3 to 4 years from now. Cause I know how that cycle works. So anyway, it has been a minute. You're right. So, I've done a bunch of stuff in between.
Well,
now
of course.
And then.
I mean, just hearing, I get exhausted hearing you talk about all these different things. And, it's interesting hearing you talk about how, some people know you from one world, some people know you from a different thing. And you've mentioned two things, which is writing software and also composing for film. And for the people who don't know, you're quite accomplished in both of those realms. I mean, for film, I think the first film you scored was the movie Go. Is that right?
That's right.
In the 90s.
Yep.
And you've also done the original Fast and Furious and a bunch of other scores. For software, probably the most famous, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Stutter Edit plugin.
Definitely. Yeah, unquestionably.
And Stutter Edit 2 that just came out. And, we don't have time to go down the list of every single thing, but how did you come to both of those, both composing for film and writing software in the midst of what was already a busy music career for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's funny because there's a thread that weaves through this conversation about me as a kid in all of this, which is my early life was all studying classical music. So, I mentioned that, I studied piano Suzuki method under this amazing woman, Faye Bonner. And then I studied with a gentleman named Sotirios Vlahopoulos, who is a phenomenal classical composer who's still alive. He's in his 90s, and I speak to him every now and again, and he's still composing. He's a brilliant man.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah, he was playing me Bartók and Stravinsky and Penderecki and like crazy atonal and aleatoric composers when I was 8-9 years old, because he thought I could handle them. Like my friends, were studying the B's, right? Bach, Brahms, Beethoven, all this stuff. And I was listening to, compositions for Hiroshima by Penderecki, this crazy, like quarter tonal, just like, wall of mental aleatoric music. And so my whole early life was all classical music. So when I was a young, teenager, very young, basically. Like, so after I turned 10, my pet interest in music was English New Wave. And then I stumbled onto the kind of early break dancing culture of music, and therefore found everything from Depeche Mode and New Order and Howard Jones all the way through to Kraftwerk, Kahn, Cabaret Voltaire, and Africa Bambaataa and Man Parrish and Nucleus and all that early New York and breakdancing stuff. And so I was so riveted and fascinated by these early electronic sounding records that I also too, I was interested in computers. And it was around that time, about, 11, 12 years old, where, mowing lawns, shoveling driveways, delivering papers. And I bought my first computer, IBM 5150. It's in the back of the room, right back there.
Oh, nice.
And that computer, I learned a program called Voyager Sequencer Plus Gold on. It was my first sequencer. I rebuilt that computer to the metal. It taught me about DOS and compiling things. I learned to program in BASIC and then BASIC A and eventually in COBOL. And I taught some folks that my dad worked with. I tutored them in Pascal when I was a young teenager. So I was really into computers and computer programming, and then eventually into synthesizers because of these, English New Wave records, as I mentioned, and breakdancing music. So I was buying and saving up for computers, and then eventually for synthesizers and samplers and drum machines. And then I went to Berkeley. I studied jazz. And so these are already completely interwoven interests of mine. And so, in the 90s, I started realizing that some of these crazy kind of proprietary methodologies and techniques that I was coming up with in production, that I was doing meticulously by hand, that there would be a way to automate them. And so they started out as things like C-Sound and Max MSP patches. And I studied C-Sound with this brilliant man named Dr. Richard Boulanger at Berkeley. And So I was comfortable, coding in a music language is still where I do most of my prototyping. And I was building a lot of instruments that I was using on records in the 90s. And then eventually in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started saying these can be productized into things that make sense in other people's workflow, and jump forward 10 years from that. And then, Ben Burt's is using Stutter Edit for the asteroid flybys in Star Wars. And like my 14-year-old kid self dies. Like, I don't even know what to do with that still. Right. So,
yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah, it's a crazy thing, but they all have been these interwoven and interspersed interests since I was a kid. So I'm just as comfortable. I mean, I get a lot of flack when I pick up a baton. Everybody looks at me really funny, right? Every time when I go stand at the podium in front of an orchestra, they're like, I've literally had people's true story jump out and say, only the composer touches that. What are you doing? And I'm like, I wrote this stuff. I'm sorry, I think. What? I don't know what's happening. Okay, in 4, 2, 3, 4, right? And so, So anyway, they've been things that I've been interested in and doing since I was a kid. So I love classical music. I love synthesizers, computers, and electronics, and I love programming. And when I find something that I want to be able to do compositionally that doesn't exist yet, that's not an intimidating event for me. It's happened for a long time. And so I just think, okay, well, the next couple of months, we're going to be spending in Xcode, and I'm going to have to hire a couple guys or gals to work on this project. And then, so it's just kind of the way it goes,
Was it hard to break into something like film scoring at the start when people knew you, or there was a perception of you as, kind of the dance guy or the trance DJ or whatever it was?
Was there ever? Absolutely. I mean, still at times you get that. I'll tell you a really funny story. This is a funny one. I'll come to it in a second, but absolutely, to answer your question, yes. And I was so lucky that Doug Lyman. So I studied film composition at Berkeley. Like that was what I was studying there, and spots and streamers and SMPTE timecode and all that kind of stuff. It's what I studied at Berkeley, and I already had this background in counterpoint theory, harmony, composition, and as a kid, and so I was perfectly comfortable writing for strings, brass, woodwinds, choir. But not many people would give me the chance to do that. And so, in fact, no one would give me the chance to do that for the exact reason you said, because after everybody decides something is a fork, they can never unsee that, right? So they had decided, like, you're the dance music guy, right? So you're that, okay? And so I was really fortunate in that Doug Lyman, who's gone on to do Born Supremacy and all these amazing action films, came to me and he said, dude, I love your music and I would love for you to write the music for this film because it's a film about rave culture. And so I really lucked out. And then the second film that I did was called Under Suspicion with Gene Hackman and Morgan Freeman. That was the first time I got to write for full orchestra. And that was terrifying. I literally did that. I did that film for free so that I had the opportunity to write for a full orchestra and prove that I could do it.
Oh, wow.
So that's an exclusive, too. I've never actually said that out loud, okay?
I love that you're putting it out there, though, man, because I can only imagine how much work that must have been and how much time that must have taken to do it for free. Just knowing that this was something so important to you that it was worthwhile to have sort of the proof to show people.
You're exactly right. And thank you. That feels really kind of affirming because it was a big sort of self-investment. And funnily, right, like all the dance music representatives, people, friends, labels, blah, blah, were like, wait, I remember when this was happening, it's like, there's festivals this summer and there's, you gotta, when's the next thing that's coming out when are you going to do another remix? And I'm like, sorry, not sorry. I'm focused on this thing right now. And this is going to take 4-5 months of my life.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the end. I want to do this. Like I'm super passionate about it. And so those friends and representatives were freaking out while I did this. And then they're freaking out while I do this thing. And, it's been so hard to amass a group of people around us, like a team of people that really actually understand me in a congruent way, that get this guy is a valid orchestral composer. He writes music software and he makes electronic music. It's really not more complicated than that. It's like kind of those are the three things sort of bound together. But it's been so confusing because most people that we've worked with in kind of management agent capacities over the years, they'll latch onto one thing, like, okay, wow, he can do these great scores. We just want him to do that, so we're going to uproot him from this whole other community that he's involved and invested with. So that's why we've worked with the same group of people for years and years. I've had the same film agent, Laura Engel, who's a family friend of ours now for 20 years, and she just gets it. If I say, all right, Laura, I'm not scoring a film for 2 years. I've got other stuff that I'm working on. She's like, I love you. That's totally cool. Let's have a nice dinner when you come to LA to visit. So she understands.
That's great, man. Well, for anyone out there who's listening, because I think this is actually an important point, what have you learned about how to assess whether someone is going to work well on your team? How, even if somebody has access or power, how can you tell whether this is actually the person you want to work with versus going with somebody who maybe isn't as flashy, but, understands you more? Is that something you've kind of learned over time?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Now that is a really, really tough question. It's funny because I got approached about a business that, in a sort of friends and family kind of angel round sort of role recently that is an incredible, I probably should say the name of it because I don't know if they're launched yet, but it's an incredible idea. Imogen Heap is involved in it as well too. There is this, it's incredible. It's like a democratization of representation. So it's a way that a kid that would never have access to a big manager, a big agent, a big publisher can have that. But they have them in these very thin vertical slices. So that person taps in, they say, okay, you've got this, that, and the other thing, do this. And then they're gone. And then at the next important thing, they kind of tap back in. And there's a rotating group of representatives that are all multidisciplinary across many different areas and spectrums of the music industry. It's such a sick idea. Anyway, it's been a long time coming for something like that to happen because my answer to your question is that is sort of, that is all down to, do you have telepathy and how sophisticated are your interrogation skills? I'm serious. It's like, what do? Waterboard the people before you let them be your agent? Maybe you should. I don't know. But I'll tell you, a thing has happened over the last, I would say 10 years. A thing has happened over the last 10 years. And, the music industry has such a horrific reputation just in general. There's that William S. Burroughs quote about, I can't remember it specifically, but it's something about, filled with thieves and charlatans, and that's just the good part or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there's some truth in that. But I think something that's interesting that's happened, that really, really happened over the last 10 years, especially in the electronic music community, is there has become an expectation that because a manager, this is specific to managers, so we're going to drill down on managers, okay? So agents, we know, make their money from an artist performing live, right?
Yep.
And these days, with what streaming royalties are like and things like that, artist royalties in general, that's how most artists keep food on their table, pay for families, right, is from touring. And like it or not, or I guess like hearing it or not, because it's such a coveted thing. People see it and it looks so glamorous, and people are playing for tens of thousands of people, and sometimes flying private because they have 2 shows in a night and stuff like this. That is, I'm just going to say it. It's just a horrible life.
Yeah. It can be.
Like an actually horrible life. So I was going to try to dance around that one and kind of color it in, nice language,
right.
But I've watched that eat people alive that I care about too.
I have too. Absolutely.
And so the thing is about that, but now there are people that really enjoy that. And it's a season, right? So it's a season in their life, and they give 4 years to that, and they're out on the road a lot. They have a really good time. And then that's enough of that, right?
Yeah.
And then they kind of, get into a different sort of rhythm with it. But I've seen people that are not doing it, and this comes to the manager thing, that are not doing it on their own incentive. Okay, they're doing it out of fear. And the carrot that managers, this new group of managers, dangle is relevancy. And they use that exact word, and it's intended to terrify. I want everybody that's an artist to rewind this and listen to it a couple times. That word is used as, it is weaponized, and it is used to terrify an artist into being on the road to pay a commission to a manager. And that time is often much better invested in the creation of media and sporadically being on the road to support that media. But that's not how a manager makes money, because artists don't make money. Even it's what do they call it? The long tail, the 1% in music are the only people actually making any kind of substantial money on with streaming royalties. I'll tell you a hysterical royalty story. This is going to blow everybody's mind. And I told them, I warned you guys I was going to tell this story. I got a royalty statement the other day. Okay. One of the songs is Love Comes Again that I'm singing and wrote with Tiesto. The royalties were negative. Did you guys hear that? No, just be with that for a second. It was a negative royalty. What is a negative royalty? They still have not sufficiently explained this to me. The way that they explained it is that somehow there was an overcalculation by $1 or $2 on what your streaming royalties were. So they subtracted it from the current royalty, and it's negative. And I'm like, wait, so I owe you guys money.
Yeah. It's like you're paying for server space to store your song or something.
Wait, for a song that has 30 million streams.
Oh, fuck, man.
Explain that one to me. So if you're an artist and you think that you're going to, have some fancy pants life, right, from streaming royalties and selling music, which who does that anymore? I mean, I'm so lucky that I have got such an awesome audience of people that actually like physical product. Like, we pre-sold so many CDs and so much vinyl already for the record because they want to have like a thing to hang on to, which is so awesome. But it's a rare group of people. Don't count on that, okay? But if you think you're going to make a living making and selling music, you have another thing coming entirely. And if you want to be a musician, you're going to have to be on the road. And so therefore, picking a manager, especially in electronic music space, is of tantamount importance because they are incentivized to keep you out on the road. Many of them don't care about your physical, emotional health and well-being, and they'll work you like a racehorse or a greyhound. And when you get a massive bout of nervous exhaustion or have found comfort in drugs and alcohol and need to be in rehab, they're gone and they're on to the next people. Yeah. And you can forget about, you're done, right? Yeah. So you want to always, you said like the flashy kind of manager versus the sort of more stoic sort of, person of integrity is what my brain heard in that. And I always err on, whenever I see some manager with like, some like hipster haircut and little thin tattoos up his arms and like yo bro and like long t-shirts, I'm like, this is not my tribe. Like I want somebody sensible that has artists that they've worked with for years, that love them. They know each other's families. I mean, Laura Engel has represented Danny Elfman since she was 18 years old. She was humping around gear as a stagehand for Oingo Boingo. As an 18-year-old, right?
Oh, man,
and now, she has worked with Danny as a film composer since his career began, since he left Oingo Boingo. And, I know her husband, Jimmy, plays harmonica for Bruce Springsteen. Their daughters are incredible people. Like, I just feel so lucky to be in the company of people that are that gifted and that remarkably knowledgeable and successful, but are honest and integrous people. And man, you can count that group of people on maybe two hands if you're lucky on a good day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe what I'm getting from this too, and the piece of advice I want to impart to anybody listening is take your time with that kind of stuff, because I think when you're young and coming up, anyone who wants to do anything for you is appealing and exciting. But I think the earlier you can start to really assess, hold yourself back and think deeply. And the earlier you can get into that kind of mindset, the better. Yeah. And I wanted to say one more thing too, you made me think of, and then I have like two more quick questions and we'll get out of here. But you mentioned, that fear of relevancy that a manager will, kind of dangle that and say, if you don't do X, you won't be relevant, that sort of thing. That actually, to me, connects back to something you said earlier, talking about how our attention span is getting shorter and shorter in the age of social media and all of that. I think it's kind of the same thing, man, because if you're just chasing that next viral piece of content or that, chasing a hot sound or doing whatever you feel like you need to do to stay in that attention, I think the window for that is getting smaller and smaller. It's getting harder to hit and the payoff is shorter, right? And so that just connected with me when you said that, because I think anyone who's worried about staying relevant is kind of just worrying about the wrong thing. You know what I mean?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that was, I hope you guys rewind that and listen to it. That was really good stuff right there. Just to stay with that for a moment too, there's something very important about what you're saying, okay? Which is, people say, we didn't talk at all about AI, which has been the last 4 years of mine doing R&D on, artificial intelligence training sets and recursive neural networks, guided adversarial networks. And a lot of this stuff will become kind of products over the next couple years, but it's sort of the elephant in the room on this conversation is artificial intelligence. People say, "Oh, I make music for man." It's like it's cool, and it's like right this second, and it's got this number of streams and this number of listens on this thing or whatever. And what they're not realizing is that when people say the Spotify algorithm, what do you think that algorithm is? It's artificial intelligence. So what you're doing, if you're and I'm not saying that you don't want to be successful in that domain, right? That you don't want to reach people through streaming services. Of course you do. I do. I'm sure you do. Our listeners to this do. But that being said, if that is the target end goal, you are not making music for people. You're making it for artificial intelligence, right? You are gaming an algorithm, right? Because that algorithm does audio feature set identification, that's what it's called, and it's looking at similarities in the topography of the music, and the funnel is going like this, so things are becoming so homogenized, and this is my point, is not congruent with the human experience of listening to music. People don't want everything to sound and feel the same. And that's why that is the absolute truth as to why the attention span is shortening, is because people are not finding things organically that feel human and authentic and have this feeling of hope or sorrow or love or loss or longing, all of these kinds of things. They're finding something that's like, it's like candy. It's like you eat it, it tastes great while you're eating it, and then you feel like crap, your insulin crashes after, right? Yeah. So I think that I think that one of the most important things that people listening to this that make music or any kind of creative thing can think about is, sure, it's important to reach people through these modern platforms. And there's a way to do that with radio edits, right? Or, with short versions, if you're a filmmaker, Instagram stories, whatever it is, you can condense the things that you do, but people are longing for an authentic, artistic interaction with people whose music, art, film that they love. And so that's what we should really be thinking about, I think, is our creative expression being authentic, not making music for an algorithm or a machine, but making music for each other, right?
I love that.
And to do that, you have to start with yourself. If the end goal is making this thing that gets blah number of listens and blah number of streams and blah whatever, you're making something that's not for people. You're making something that's for machinery. Whereas if you sit down and say, man, I've carried this thing that is heavy on my heart for months, maybe for years. I have a need to express it. And I bet other people have this feeling too. That's the stuff that will connect with people. So
I love that, man. And I think, you're somebody who obviously technology has been integral to your whole career, the way you think about music. And it's great to hear you talk about how we can have a healthy relationship with technology and not sort of end up serving it, how to still make it work with us or for us, but not to end up serving it. And it makes me wonder, in your own career, and this is sort of two sides of the same coin kind of question, looking back, what would you say is the most important or one of the most important technical advances that allowed you to do something or unlocked something in your career? And what still isn't possible that you wish was possible? Or what are you excited about technologically?
Well, that second one's harder, but so I'll tackle the first one first. The second one's kind of easy, like all that stuff I'm making. So literally currently right now, the stuff I'm stumped on where I'm like, man, I need to be able to do that. I need to be able to do this, so on and so forth. And I, full disclosure, to kind of looping back to something we were just talking about, one of those things is absolutely, I've always wanted to quite literally clone myself. It's just like not enough time in the day.
Yeah.
I think that augmenting our ability to create media using artificial intelligence. Now, this has to be sculpted by the artistic community or it's going to get wildly kind of think Black Mirror out of hand, right? But I think that that's not a, Ray Kurzweil, I would say that's 20 years in the future, and it's not. This is an impending reality. This is what people in the MI space or music technology are working on, including myself right now. So those things are some of the things that I'm most excited about. And also to always new methodologies for creating sound. So sounds I have never heard before. Every day when I get out of bed to when I go to sleep, at some point in the day is devoted to making a sound I've never heard. Every single day of my life, quite literally since I was a child. So there's that piece. And then, I would say the most important thing and the reason I feel so lucky to be alive when I am insofar as kind of creative expression would be the ability to bind audio to electronic instruments, right? So i.e., MIDI and now MIDI 2.0 and expressive MIDI and these kind of things. So basically the advent of digital recording, right, is the most significant thing to happen in my lifetime with absolute certainty. And it has allowed an expression and exploration of these techniques that are kind of cornerstones of my production style, like stutter editing. This all comes from the advent of digital audio workstations and direct-to-disc recording and sampling technology and all these kind of things. So, if I had been born 50 years ago, I would have been just quite literally, splicing together tape all day long. Right. and I know it. And, I've sat at our kitchen table with someone who's an absolute hero of mine, Ian Stanley, who did all the Fairlight programming for Tears for Fears. He was in Tears for Fears. And he told me stories of what originally was Sound Tools, but then became Pro Tools. So pre that, they would quite literally stretch out a 24-track tape and sit with a razor blade, and they would cut into where the tracks are, and then like make a jigsaw puzzle with these thin little strips. Man. So the drums come in over here, but they want to edit to the guitars over here. And they would literally spend an entire day tracing this thing out and cutting together two perfectly fitted pieces and then gluing them together, because there was no way to edit those things together, or like literally beat mixing sequencers together, because back in the day, like this guy over here, one of my favorites, the OBXA, they had their own unique sequencing or kind of intercommunication protocol that worked the OBXA with the Oberheim drum machines, the DX, the DMX. Then Roland had DCB, another one of my favorites, the Jupiter 8 over here. So they had DCB, so you could clock a Jupiter 8 with a Juno 60, right? So these things didn't talk. So people would sit with the the tempo knobs, and they would count in reverse, and they'd say, okay, on the count of 1. So 4, 3, 2, 1, and everybody hit play, and then you would ride the tempo knob like freaking DJing to tape to make the record. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God I'm alive for this piece right here. Yeah. So that's the biggest one for me.
That's a great answer, man. And there's so much more we could talk about. I don't want to take up your whole day, so I just want to end it just with a real quick sort of speed round of a couple things we didn't get to talk about.
Yeah.
And I'll just say something and just tell me what you remember, what comes to mind.
Okay.
And I have to ask you about this because this record, I just ended up playing the shit out of it, which is the record you made for NSYNC, which is Pop.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, man.
And that's such a departure from so much of what we've been talking about. I wonder what you remember about making a record for NSYNC.
That was, it was an incredible experience. And during the Movement and Still Life tour, those guys it was like a running joke. My tour manager would say to me, oh, your boy band friends are here again. And those guys would literally play, like they would play, what's it called? Madison Square Garden. This actually happened. They play Madison Square Garden, took a private plane down to my House of Blues show after they finished.
Whoa.
In Florida to come watch and hang out, and were courting me, asking me to do that because Justin and JC were like fans, right? And they were super into all the kind of hyper edited stuff. They're always talking to me about the hip hop phenomenon. That's like one of their favorite songs, or was one of their favorite songs. And so those two guys were coming out to all my shows, and I was asking my friends, my like cool dance music friends, like this boy band is asking me to do a track for them. Like, what do you think of that? Like, probably everybody will be all upset if I do that, but they're really talented. Like, these guys are legit musicians, I mean, Justin came to the house to visit and grabbed an acoustic guitar off the wall and it's like beatboxing and singing and tapping on the guitar while he's playing. I'm like, this dude is ridiculous. Like, people thought of them as this kind of cheesy manufactured thing, and I immediately saw their musical proficiency, like what gifted singers they were, what gifted musicians they were. And so eventually all my dance music friends were telling me, don't do that, everybody's gonna hate it. And I was like, you know what, I don't even care, because these guys are really talented. It's gonna be a fun piece of pop music, and irony of it being called pop, right? Dirty pop. And so we just had a blast doing that. And then, of course, I did a bunch of stuff. Jay was dating Brittany at the time, and then I did a bunch of stuff with her, and I just had a wonderful time. And then I see all those folks every now and again, and it's a great memory, like an amazing memory. And that was really, too, the first time I ever super flexed on my stutter editing technique, on a record that a lot of people heard.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's a special record for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's it. I never thought about that because, of course, now that you say that, I can hear those stutter edits all over that record. But for a lot of people, just your average pop fan, maybe that was the first time they had heard something like that.
I would think that it is, and it was so much fun to do that. And there's just a really great, it was a fun time in my life too. Like during that, when that came out, Michael Jackson, asked me to come play at his birthday party right after that. And
what was that like?
That was crazy, man. He sent a helicopter and got picked up and got to fly out to Neverland, and he was just incredible guy. I got to watch. This is a crazy story. I watched the part of the Evander Holyfield fight with Michael Jackson and Mike Tyson in Michael's movie theater. It was a crazy experience. And Michael actually sang for me alone. We were alone for a moment. He was sitting on the wall in front of his theater. And I said, I'm a fan since as a kid. Like, you have no idea how much I love your music. Would you sing something for me? And he just sat there sitting on this wall and improvised. And it was still to this day like one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard in my life.
Man, I almost got chills just hearing you say that.
It was amazing.
Fuck, yeah. I almost don't want to ask more because that's an amazing memory right there. Honestly, I feel like, how do you feel? Is there anything else we haven't covered? Anything else you want to get out there before we wrap it up here?
I feel really good about this. I'm really excited. Some of the stuff that we touched on that are, inflection points for artists. It always makes me feel good when in an interview you get to like even one thing like that. We nailed a bunch of them where I feel like if I was someone listening to this podcast and I was an artist of any sort, I would feel like, oh man, I really got something out of it, So I feel really good.
So, man, I think we did good.
Yeah.
That's good, man. I think we're done. We don't got to do more. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time, man. I really enjoyed this.
Me too, Willie. It's so nice to meet you, man. And I hope we can do this in person. Like when things get to normal, we'd love to have you out.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah. Once we're back to normal, let's grab dinner. That'd be great, man. I'd love that.
Yeah. Sounds great, man. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Okay. Take care. See you around.
All right, that's the show. Shout out to BT. Great to have you on, man. For everybody out there listening, don't forget BT's new album, The Lost Art of Longing. It is out right now. Go hit the link in the description of this episode. You can go grab that, follow BT, keep up to date with everything he's doing. You can also keep up to date with me. I'm at Willy Joy or at back-to-back-pod on all social media, or back-to-back-pod@gmail.com is the email address if you want to reach out directly with any questions, comments, concerns, artists you'd like to see on the show, all of that, just hit me up. You can also come join the Back-to-Back Discord. I would love to have you join. That's my server, my chat. I'm in there every single day. We've got a great group of folks. Come in there. Let us know what's going on in your life, what music you're listening to. If you make music, let us know what you're working on. Post something up, get some feedback, connect with other producers, drop us some memes, whatever you're feeling. We want to have you. The link for that is also in the description. As always, my name is Willy Joy. I want to thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you're doing well out there. I hope you are staying safe and healthy and sane and happy. I hope whatever you're working on, whatever you're hoping on right now, I hope it's moving for you. I hope it's progressing. I hope, just generally things are going well. That's what I'm wishing for you this week. As for me, I am recording a lot of episodes this month. I really got a little overzealous telling my team to schedule these. But on the plus side, what that means is there are going to be a lot of excellent episodes coming down the pipeline for you. And some more stuff I'm really excited to share in the weeks to come. So until then, take care of yourself. Take care of the people around you. I'm thinking about you guys. Hit me up anytime at Willy Joy or at Back to Back Pod on all social media. And that is it. I will talk to you next week. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.